mean, unfortunately, I don't think TikTok would support a 5-hour Woodstock stream.
Tells you how much I know about TikTok.
I don't have it either, but yeah.
You have to be our TikTok star, because if it's not you, it's not going to be any of us.
Should Persefoni have a TikTok? Is that something that's in the works?
I don't know. I'm spending all my efforts building my MySpace page to make sure that's as polished as possible.
I think you're liking this being a little older than somebody else a little too much.
I very much enjoy it. This is Climate Tech with Kentaro, a podcast featuring the brightest minds and most influential voices in climate tech. I'm your host, Kentaro Kawamori. And we're back. Welcome to Season 2 of Climate Tech with Kentaro. I'm ecstatic to be on the pod again. This time, I invited not one, but two newly minted homegrown podcasters from Persefoni, Tim Mohin and Caitlin Kinney. They're here to talk about Sustainability Decoded, our brand new show and the first spin-off of what we hope to be a growing podcast franchise. Tim Mohin is a lifelong environmentalist and our Chief Sustainability Officer at Persefoni. Tim started his career at the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and moved on to various roles in corporate responsibility and sustainability at big tech firms like Apple and Intel. His last stop before Persefoni was CEO of the Global Reporting Initiative, or GRI, the world's most widely adopted sustainability reporting standard. What's cool about Sustainability Decoded, our new podcast, is that you won't just hear experts go into the deep end throwing a bunch of acronyms that frankly not everybody gets. Tim is joined by his trusty co-host Caitlin, a self-confessed science nerd and Gen Z climate activist. She'll help break down what's happening in sustainability and climate. In this episode, we'll hear from Tim and Caitlin on why sustainability has to be decoded and what we're missing in these conversations. On the show, they also turned the tables and got me talking about what I'm tracking in climate tech and what I really think about Elon Musk. Tim Mohin, Caitlin Kinney, welcome to Climate Tech. What the hell are you guys doing here?
We're trying to figure that out too.
You guys work at Persefoni. You're cheating. How did you guys make your way on this recording?
We bought our way in.
Yeah. we know somebody at the top.
Well, I feel like a very lonely host now since I don't have a co-host, so I need to find myself a co-host first and foremost. But extremely exciting that the Persefoni podcast franchise is expanding, and I can't think of a better pair for it to expand with than you two. Let's dig into it. So, Decoded. Why Decoded?
Yeah, so we talked a lot about this when we set up the podcast. And as you know, Kentaro, I've been doing this for a very, very long time. And I know a lot of people in the ESG/sustainability business. And we thought if it were just Tim interviewing other sustainability OGs, that it would get pretty deep and kind of hard for folks to follow and understand, who weren't kind of niche-y and nerdy like me. And so we really wanted this to be more accessible. We wanted future leaders to understand sustainability so they could act upon it. And we hit upon this idea that Caitlin in particular, who's super smart and super interested in the topic, would be representative of an entire generation of future leaders who could ask the right questions at the right time and really get to that decoded part of the discussion. And I will just say, and then I'll shut up and let Caitlin talk, because that is part of my problem, that of the podcasts we've done thus far, I've known every single person we've interviewed for double-digit years. And yet the discussions that we've had have gotten into subjects we would have never discussed had Caitlin not been there.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. From my perspective, I'm someone who's super passionate about climate change, and it's something I've grown up knowing is kind of an inevitable risk that we have to face. But at the same time, I wasn't really adept in kind of the policy, the corporate side, ESG, all of that stuff, right? So that takes a lot of time to kind of delve into and experience working in the field. So I think, a lot of young people like me feel like they don't really know where to start or how to join. We want to be a part of the workforce, but don't necessarily know what it all means, and it can be overwhelming. So being able to talk to such interesting guests with a lot of experience in sustainability for so long, and being able to hear why they joined in the first place and kind of get that personal touch as well is great because, of course, as being a great sector to work in, it's also deeply emotional and has a lot of meaning for lots of people.
Well, I like how you put that, Tim, niche and nerdy. I think that's something to aspire to for most people. But to your guys' point, I don't think I've ever been in a sustainability conversation where people are trying to introduce the concept where the words acronym soup have not been used.
Alphabet soup.
I mean, that pretty much sums it up, right? Alphabet soup of acronyms. And that's kind of part of the problem. And it reminds me of, obviously, we've had a lot of internal discussions recently on the wonderfully hard thing of making the complex simple. And I was at the Milken Institute conference, and I was in a room full of impact investors, sustainability investors, climate investors, and the acumen on the topics that you all are going to dive into were very low. And these are people that are doing it for the first time. And Caitlin, to your point, I don't think it's just the younger generation. I think it's also, frankly, the folks that are in the later stages of their career, but they may be less prone to asking the questions of what the fuck does this mean and what do I do with it? There's a lot of confusion. By the way, you guys can't cuss on your podcast because I've exhausted our bleeper budget for that. So I reserve the right for that. Yes. Well, cool. Very exciting. Maybe you give us a sneak peek of who's coming on the pod. What kind of guests? Any sneak peeks on who you've had on already?
Sure. Our first guest was an old friend of mine, a senior attorney with a law firm called Morrison and Foerster, affectionately known by the abbreviation MoFo.
MoFos.
Yeah,
we love
exactly.
the MoFos. I love when they sponsor podcasts and then they're like, this podcast is sponsored by MoFo.
MoFo. Yeah, you do a double take every time you hear it. But Suze McCormick, who has been kind of a leader in this space for many, many years and has brought about the evolution of the benefit corporation in California and in other states that is actually on the books now in law, giving corporations the ability to do more than just return profit to shareholders, was a fantastic guest. And we try to get into the kind of personal reasons why people entered this field. As you know, Kentaro, sustainability can attract people from all walks of life. You mentioned meeting with investors. So we're getting a lot of folks who have a finance background now into the field. We've had marketing people enter the field. We have folks like myself who really always studied environmental and social issues from the very beginning that have been in it for quite a while. But because it is such a big tent, you can learn so much and, pass along information. So that's exactly what we've been doing in our podcast. We've also interviewed a few others. We had the one and only Bob Eccles.
Oh boy,
join us for yeah.
I guess you did blow the whole blooper budget on that one episode. Spoiler alert, they did. A little bit about Bob. He is one of the godfathers of sustainability, as I like to call him. He's the founding chairman of the Sustainability Accounting Standards Board, or SASB, and was one of the founders of the International Integrated Reporting Council. Bob is not only a legend in the field, but he's also a hell of a lot of fun. The man is in his 70s and he can deadlift over 400 pounds, and he won't let you forget it, rightfully so. I won't give away too much. You can listen to Bob's episode and the rest of the catalog as soon as you get off this one. Now back to why sustainability seems so opaque or challenging, even to stakeholders like investors and executives at publicly traded companies.
And so, we're kind of starting at zero and explaining, there's a 20-year history here, how it started, where it's going. And that's what I want to get out of this.
Yes. Unless kind of, they came in, within the last 6 to 24, 36 months, and all they know is that there's too many acronyms, and they don't necessarily know the pros and cons of each or the histories of them or why we've gotten here, combinations of politics, regional challenges, data challenges, grandstanding, all of those things, right? And I don't think they quite appreciate or understand that, not in a negative way. They literally don't have the context, which is why we're looking forward to you all helping them understand. If you've been following the show, you know that we have a regular rapid fire round with guests. Let me be honest by saying this was the worst one we've had so far, but in a good way. Why did you choose to work in the sustainability field?
So many things. I chose because, since I really was a teenager, I kind of knew about climate change, and it's something that well, naturally deeply scares me, being a young person on the earth and growing up and knowing that my future is in, our hands, and, our grandchildren's future is in our hands. So besides that very, potent and strong point, I think it's also something that is deeply connected to me because I care so much about nature, and I'm a big, I guess, tree hugger. I'm super passionate about like agriculture. I like gardening. So many things. And I just want to make sure that, we can ensure that those things remain the same for our kids, as well as like snorkeling and all the oceans and protecting fish and coral and wildlife and, so many things. I could go on for like hours on that.
You had me at snorkeling. I don't think I've ever had a cooler moment than when I got to swim with turtles in Cabo, I think was the first time. It was amazing. You cheated. It was way too long, but your answer was too good, so I couldn't cut you off. So you get a pass on that one. Tim, what made you join the sustainability world in the first place?
I don't think I've ever told you this, Kentaro, but I was the child of 60s liberal hippies who really always had these values of protecting the environment and being fair to people. And I was 9 years old at the first Earth Day, so I remember it well. We lived in D.C. and the protests were pretty massive, and we were always actually protesting something, usually against the war in Vietnam. And it really touched me. And my father was an outdoorsman and took me out many, many times, fishing, camping, etc. And so when it was my turn to sort of choose a topic to study at school, I chose environmental science. And at the time, there wasn't environmental science. It was like very weird to do such a thing. But I persisted. I actually had to design my own degree program at Duke to get through my master's program. But honestly, it's just been a part of me from very early childhood.
So were they at Woodstock?
My stepmother was at Woodstock, and she talks about it often. And here's a fun fact. Joel McCower, who we both know and love, wrote the definitive history of Woodstock.
That's right. He is the expert.
And because my stepmother was there, I went and got a signed copy for her.
Joel McCower is the chairman and co-founder of GreenBiz Group. GreenBiz Group is a media and events company focusing at the intersection of business, technology, and sustainability. And yes, he did write the book, Woodstock, The Oral History, back in 1989.
How amazing.
Yeah, Caitlin, if you want to dive deep. See, I am now in the middle age, so now I get to impart wisdom on the younger ones after having to endure a decade plus of being called the baby. You are now the baby, passing the baton to you. If you want to learn about Woodstock, which I certainly lived through, in the early 60s. Maybe that was a different thing.
Maybe you dreamt that.
Yeah, maybe I dreamt that. Maybe I just read Joel's book. But Joel has a great book on it. Yeah, he's literally the historian on it.
Yeah.
I've watched like Woodstock in full on YouTube. I think there's like a YouTube video that's like a 5-hour version or something. I've watched it like quite a few times. So I'm a big fan of that.
The only thing that you could have said to make that more Gen Z is if you told me you watched that on TikTok.
I mean, unfortunately, I don't think TikTok would support a 5-hour Woodstock stream.
Tells you how much I know about TikTok.
I don't have it either, but yeah.
I don't believe you.
I genuinely do not have it.
You need to be on TikTok.
Okay, right. Okay, sure, yeah.
You have to be our TikTok star, because if it's not you, it's not going to be any of us.
Should Persefoni have a TikTok? Is that something that's in the works?
I don't know. I'm spending all my efforts building my MySpace page to make sure that's as polished as possible.
I think you're liking this being a little older than somebody else a little too much.
I very much enjoy it.
Kentaro, you were born an old soul, even though you're a very young man, and I don't know where you get that.
Like I always told you, I was a 40-year-old man by the time I was 16.
There's no doubt.
I just want to go home and watch my medical dramas. Okay, people, leave me alone. Get off my lawn. All right, now that we have significantly deviated from what was supposed to be a quickfire round, damn you both. Look at what you've done to the podcast schedule. All right, most surprising thing you've learned about the other co-host in the episodes you've done so far. Caitlin, go.
I think that Tim actually had his own radio show in college was a great one. I learned about that and thought that was so fun. And he described, right, like you would open up all the windows and you could hear your voice being played from the other students on campus. And I just thought that was awesome. I thought that was great.
TJ the DJ, that's what I was back in college. And yes, I have been outed now. That is true. 2 turntables and a microphone.
Oh, okay. So it was a music radio show. It was not an environmental radio show.
Correct. In college, we had... one radio station. Well, there were actually two. One was recorded in total crap, and so no one listened to it, and everybody listened to us. And so we had the entire town listening to us. And on a spring day, because it was upstate New York, you lifted the windows, everybody put their speakers out, played Frisbee, and it was my voice running around the town and campus. So you felt kind of like a big wheel at the time. And I had done that for a number of years, had live music shows, jazz shows, drive time shows, lots of different shows. So yeah.
Very cool. The only thing I've ever DJ'd was my first job as a floor guard at a skating rink, which was my first job when I was 15.
That's so fun.
And that's all you get for that story.
Ah,
Tim?
Oh, I have learned that Caitlin is in fact very, very smart, but also deep in many ways. Like she gets it. You know, it's probably pretty intimidating to have somebody like me who's been doing my career for longer than she's been alive by like double and talking to somebody else who's sort of similar in that OG scale and jumping in and asking really interesting questions. So I'm just super impressed with Caitlin. So that's it.
Well, I'm glad, because when I had John Schieber on the show, we talked about how both of us are whatever the opposite of Mensa is, the hosts of the Simple Minds Conference. So we're glad to have somebody that is on the opposite end of the intelligence spectrum, Caitlin. So thank you for raising the collective IQ of the podcast crew.
You're welcome.
But I'm glad to hear that. That's very prescient of both of you to choose that sort of hosting format and have a balance on both sides. All right. What are you looking forward to the most in the podcast series? Tim, let's start with you this time.
I'm looking forward to really getting into some of the future. Where is ESG going? Because I've been around this for a long time, as you know, and I've seen it from the angle of trying to kind of be an activist, maybe even from within a corporation, trying to change its habits. But actually, what's happening now is this is all going mainstream. And it's being incorporated into capital markets, investment decisions, as you were talking about, new rules, regulations, and standards. And what I really want to get out of this is, so where is that all taking us? And as Caitlin and I were discussing earlier, and you mentioned Kintaro, sometimes I think we've made it too complex. And if we could simplify this, it's actually, I think, within our grasp and absolutely essential for people in Caitlin's generation that we could solve this thing. We could actually create the clarity needed for action. And that's what I want to get out of this.
Exactly.
Excellent.
I think from my perspective, I'm most excited to learn what's going on in kind of sectors that I'm not used to, I haven't had experience in. I want to have lots of people on who maybe focus on climate change in an interdisciplinary way. So, I'm a big psychology nerd, for example, and I know that there are lots of people who work in that space who also are working for climate change and work in the US government and work in have forged a career path that isn't as straightforward as you'd think. So I kind of want to see how that's worked out for them and hear their perspectives.
So you are our resident climate shrink.
Yes. But so my degree at university was in psychology, and I actually tried to change and adjust my degree a bit so I could study environmental science as well as psychology. And my dissertation in my final year was about environmental behavior change. So I think it was called overcoming the awareness action gap, the role of environmental values, barriers, and identity in determining students' behavior. So I think I'm really interested in the behavior change side, green nudging, all of that stuff is super fascinating to me. So yeah, I'd love to have someone on who maybe has experience in that as well.
Yes, the whole nudging theory in general, even just outside of green nudging, is a very powerful one. And there was I forget the gentleman's name that wrote the original paper on it. Green nudging is a tool used to encourage consumers to act in an environmentally benign way. Nudges might appeal to self-image or people's tendency to socially conform. Think about the government sending you letters about your energy consumption while suggesting that your neighbors used less energy. Another example would be the visually attractive labels on plant-based dishes or recycling bins. All right, last question for you all. Dream guest. Anyone in the world, who would you have on?
Well, there are some celebrities that I would love to interview. Robert Downey Jr., Leonardo DiCaprio, some of those folks who have basically used the power of their celebrity to drive the environmental issue forward. I'd love to talk to some of those people. But the nerdy answer are people that are really working on the front lines of trying to make climate change and other sustainability issue part of global commerce. I mentioned Emmanuel Faber. This guy, he was the former CEO of Danone. And I think he's no longer the CEO because perhaps, and this is rumor, pushed sustainability a little too hard. Much respect. I love that. I would love to get a guy like that on our podcast and really understand what makes him tick and how he's trying to drive international standards to solve the climate crisis. And then you could get into some of the UN powerhouses like Antonio Guterres, who has made statements that the real criminals are not the people protesting on the streets against the lack of climate action. The real criminals are the governments and corporations who are making claims that they cannot possibly meet and are taking no action, essentially greenwashing. That's the kind of person I would love to get on our podcast.
Nice. Good roster. Caitlin?
Well, I mean, the first one that comes to mind is I would love to get a scientist on who's worked on the IPCC reports.
Oh, and I thought I was nerdy. Holy cow.
I know. I'm such a science nerd. That is just where my heart lies. I'm so interested in all the science. Just kind of people who are, thinking about the climate crisis from a different perspective. I mean, Greta Thunberg, of course, would be amazing. I like hearing a lot about the practices of indigenous peoples as well, and the practices they've used for decades and decades to combat climate change. I think permaculture, organic agriculture, just those topics. So many people.
You said something there, Caitlin, and oftentimes in our podcast you do, that just opens up a new train of thought. And when you said Greta Thunberg, it reminded me that in our newsletter each week, we write about the climate protests. And after the latest report from the UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, there were global protests, and I think they received very little coverage, and we tried to cover them in our newsletter. But to me, it's I would love to connect the dots between the people who are chaining themselves to buildings, including NASA scientists chaining themselves to buildings, and what's going on inside of those buildings. What are the people who are actually trying to make the change doing that's not fast enough, to try and connect the dots between the people that are really fighting on the streets and the people that are trying to fight in the halls of policy. So to me, that would be a wonderful thing for us to take on.
Totally agree. Yeah.
Well, I am super proud of you guys for going on this journey and picking up the microphone and telling that story, because frankly, I am terrible at it. I love to talk about the pragmatic technology solutions, the capital markets, the businesses which move at an infinitely faster pace than government and system level political change can happen. And that's always been one of my sort of sore spots, is I can have the conversation, but I get so frustrated at it because it's so circular, and you have to have this enormous level of patience to just have it 1,000 times. And if it's not had 1,000 times, we're in big trouble. So I'm glad you all are doing it for us, with us, on our behalf. I'm going to go back into my corner, into the zeros and ones, talk about software, talk about tech. So I think we've found the right balance on both sides, right? Not just the two of you as co-hosts on the topic, but I think between the two franchises, one franchise. Maybe we're going to be like the Fast and Furious and have 14.
Yeah.
What are they up to? 15?
It would be cool.
Podcast offshoots? That would be pretty cool.
But on a serious note, I will say this, that when I first met you, and this goes for Caitlin as well, I'm so inspired, because I find young people who are not only environmentally minded, but are taking their unique core competencies, their skill sets, in your case, software, psychology, which I just learned today about you, Caitlin, into this field to try and apply those core competencies to make a difference. So to an old guy like me, it just makes me feel full of hope. It's a really good thing to have optimism, because so much of these conversations are full of doom and gloom. And, frankly, even for me, that makes me want to take a nap. And we don't have time for naps. We have time for action. And honestly, we have to inspire people. We can solve these problems, and we will solve these problems.
Yeah, exactly. doom and gloom. I mean, people are out there talking about, there's only so much time left and all that. Well, no shit, but it hasn't worked. So we just need to shift the conversation on highlighting the stuff that is working and the people that are working it. I mean, man, it's the definition of insanity, right? We keep talking about every IPCC report that comes out, every bit of science that says it's dire. To your point, it does not work, right? Is it critical? Does it have to be published and talked about? Absolutely. But is it shifting the window? No, it's not, right? It's shifting it slightly with each turn, and that's not enough. So I think very clearly we have to shift the narrative to the change makers that are making it happen. And that is what I love about technology. We don't need a whole lot of them, right? You need a couple, three of the big breakthroughs. You need a good ecosystem to come together, and technology is exponential. We don't need everybody to solve it. We just need some key players to solve big parts of it, and we'll all be better off.
Kentaro, actually, I have a question for you. I'm going to turn the tables. I wanted to ask, what's your favorite up and coming technology that you're seeing on the cards now?
In climate tech specifically, I would assume?
Yeah.
Or in general?
Climate tech.
I'll cheat. I'll give you a little bit of both, because it's the one that isn't necessarily directly climate tech, but I think will have some of the biggest repercussions on it, and that is AR and VR. If you think about the augmented reality and virtual reality future that everybody talks about, the biggest failure we saw 7-8 years ago was Google Glasses, Google Lenses, if you remember those. I don't think it was a failure. They were just ahead of their time. It's like when Apple tried to come out with the tablet in the 90s, the Newton. It was just a little bit too early. That's incredibly exciting because it's going to significantly reduce the need for transportation among a whole bunch of use cases. And if you think about one of the hardest to abate sectors for a while is going to be transportation broadly. So if you think about public health in places like India and China, right, the cities are so congested because everybody has to jump on the moped, everybody has to get on the bus just to go get the smallest of items. Public health, I think, is going to be able to be largely moved by people in the cities, especially, which more than half of the globe now lives in big cities. So I'm incredibly excited about that because it will reduce the need for unnecessary transportation now.
Yeah.
So Elon Musk, hero or villain?
Both, undoubtedly. Say what you will about him. I think his quote unquote craziness is very calculated. Same thing. The guy is no fool, right? It's an enormously powerful platform he's built for himself, but it would be foolish not to recognize the massive, massive contributions he's had on, the climate so far. But I do think that's just the start of it. What he will have done to start the space race, which is getting the second space race, which is getting a lot of flack because of the amount of emissions that are burned when we go to space. But that's the next frontier, right? That we were promised 60 years ago when the space program first got off of its haunches. The amount of stuff we'll discover in space. And it's not about leaving the planet. It's about, new materials, new science capabilities. We've been doing this on the ISS for a long time. Satellite-based connectivity that'll cover the globe. All of those things are great for humanity. So yeah, I think he's undoubtedly both.
So we'll all have electric cars as the country erupts in civil war because he took over Twitter and allowed the Social Dilemma movie to come to fruition.
We could definitely get into a First Amendment debate on this podcast, which I won't. But thanks again, guys. Looking forward to the launch, and we'll see you on there soon.
Thanks. It's been wonderful talking to you today, Kentaro. Take care.
And just like that, we've officially launched season 2. By the way, I've listened to Tim and Caitlin's show, and I guarantee you will leave each episode smarter about sustainability. And I would also say more hopefully that this climate crisis is solvable. Sustainability Decoded is now available across the podcast universe with a handful of episodes ready for you to binge. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another fantastic episode next week. Catch you all then. Climate Tech with Kentaro is produced by our incredible team at Persefoni and Human Group Media. Our theme music is by Guest House. And if you want to learn more about Persefoni and our climate management and accounting platform, please visit our website at persefoni.com.